All right, so now we'll work on this page, student slash quiz page. We will have this page here, but we will not have direct link of this page anywhere, not in nav menu, nowhere, because it should come from here only, from start quiz button only. Okay, so in student, let's say we are going to create a quiz dot razor page, and it should have that URL only at the rate page slash student slash quiz. And here, first thing we'll inject quiz state, and it is not coming. I guess same error. Properties. No, this is content. Okay, quiz state, paste quiz state, save it, and maybe unload and reload this. Now I'm kind of used to with all these Visual Studio issues. Quiz.tracer, and we can see this. Alright. Here in on initialized or on initialized async, or maybe in on initialized, what we will do, we will check if this quiz state dot quiz, if this is null, that means we somehow directly access this page, which should not happen. So here what we'll do, we'll say uh, we can display that error alert modal or error modal, or we can directly redirect it back to the student homepage. Yeah, let's do this. Let directly redirect it to student page. So we'll say inject navigation manager. Here we'll say navigation manager dot navigate to, and you should go to student slash home with replace true. We don't want this page to be there in the navigation browser history. From here we'll directly return, we will not do anything. Okay, save it. Now we'll design this page a bit differently. Here what we should have, we need to think, should we have some quiz details or quiz info? Then we should have maybe the question, then we should have options, then we should have next button, we should have some timer also, timer, and yeah, these things only we need, right? And we need one exit test button as well. These things we need here. Okay, so before these things we need data. What I mean by data is we have quiz info that we already have from this quiz state, but we need to have this list of questions. Now there is going to be a problem. Not problem, this is how we will design it. So we will not load all the questions at once. Although this totally depends upon how you are designing your application. For me, I'm not going to load all the questions. What I will do, I will load the first question. Then when user clicks on this next button, then it will load up the second question. Okay. Now there might be other considerations as well. Maybe you might want to shuffle the questions for each student. Okay. So the randomize the questions. So all these things, there could be different things. So let's uh, work on the API layer for all these stuff, right? Getting the question one by one, randomizing the questions, should not show the questions which already shown, and then checking for the correct option or not. This is also totally depends upon you. If you want to fetch the correct option as well with the question. So when you load up the first question with all the options, will you fetch the correct answer flag with that only? That will live on the UI or not? Or maybe you will just get the question and options without that flag. Then when user clicks on next button, at that time you will simply send this question ID and the option ID which user has selected to the API. There you will check and store the status somewhere. And then there might be different considerations of how you want to display the result. So there are two approaches. Maybe when user clicks on next button or submit button, at that time only, or when user selects the options, at that time only you will show that if this option or the answer was correct or not. Or maybe you can have all these things at the very end when user submits the test. Then you will display that okay, there were these 5 questions, you have attempted this in 5 minutes, and 3 questions were correct, 2 were incorrect. So all these things you can display at the very end also. So all these are totally depends upon you how you are designing your application. Okay, so for this course, for this video, we'll keep it simple. Let's go to API. Let's revisit our entities. So in data, we have entities, we have student quiz. There we have ID, student ID. This ID is unique ID. This is fine. Student ID, quiz ID. When the student starts the quiz, we'll have the student ID, who is the student starting the quiz. Then this is the quiz ID. Started on, when user clicks on the start quiz, then we'll store this thing. Completed on, when it submits, then total score. So this we will have it at the very end. Or maybe we can keep on modifying it once the quiz progresses. Yeah, that makes sense because we are keeping it simple. If you want to extend this and you want to have it extensive stats and all that, you will have different tables, multiple tables. One is for maybe getting the questions in order, and yeah, we should have that thing somewhere, because we don't want to, when we are randomizing the questions, at that time what can happen, it can that is how random works. It can maybe give the duplicate question ID or duplicate number, right? But that is not what we need. So we might want to store the order somewhere. Maybe we can store that inside the student quiz only, not order whatever questions we have already served. So for that case, here we can have one more. There could be multiple approaches for this one as well. You can have a separate table where you can store the question IDs with the student quiz ID. This one you can store the question IDs, and maybe at the very end we can remove those, right? Yeah, that would make more sense. Or one approach could be we can have a column here, comma separated question IDs we can have. So there are different approaches, but let's create a separate class. So public class, let's say student quiz questions. Here we will have public int question ID, and before that we'll have public int student quiz ID, and then question ID. These two things we will have. Okay. So for this, move it to the separate file, and then we will not going to have any direct key in this. The primary key will have the combination of these two things. These two in the combination should be unique. So we'll have, take the student quiz questions, we'll go to our quiz context. Here first thing, we'll create a db set for this. So db set this thing, student quiz questions. Then in on model configuring, we'll say model builder dot entity. This one, for this thing, we'll say dot has key. And in this, we will have a composite key. So expression, we can say s goes to s dot, and we'll say this object, and here we'll say s dot student quiz id comma s dot question id. So this is going to be a primary key for this using these two columns. Now we need to map these two things with the respective tables. So for this, we'll have public student quiz. Then we'll have public question, question, and both of these are going to be virtual. These are navigation properties which we are using, virtual. And now we are good. We have mapped everything. Cool. Now let's go to our service. In this service, student quiz service, we will have one method public async task. Let's see what will be the return type. I don't have any idea right now. Let's see how we are doing this. So first we should maybe something have start quiz async, something like this. Using this, what should happen? First thing, we'll have student id. Second thing, we are going to have quiz id. These two things we need. Now on the basis of these two things, we need to start filling this student quiz.cs, this entity. So let's generate this entity. Var student quiz equals new student quiz. Here we'll have quiz id, student id. Then what else we have? Completed on, we don't have it yet. id, we don't have it. Quiz score is 0 default. Started on, this thing we'll use. So when we're starting it, so the date time handling is always tricky. So for this particular application, what I am going to use, I am going to use UTC only, or maybe let's use actual date time only, or let's use UTC. So how you will have, maybe you will have some specific date time service for you, and you'll use that service to get, transform, convert all the date times. Or the second approach could be you will store UTC everywhere, and when you are going to display it, at that time you will check what time zone the current client is. On the basis of that, you will convert this UTC to that time zone. So there are these two different approaches. Okay, so I'm going to use UTC now for saving and for displaying also. We'll see. So now we have the student quiz ready. Uh, Completed on is not nullable. It should be nullable. Because what if user uh, hmm, if user submits it or exits the test in between, then we'll set that completed on there only, right? Or maybe we should have one more flag where we'll say that if the user completed it or not, right? So there are three different cases. One is user started it, then completed it. Second thing is user, let's say, exited the test in between. It was not completed, but user exits the test. Then there could be third case, because we are having the total time to complete in minutes. Let's say there were 5 questions, total time was 10 minutes, but when student was giving that quiz, taking that quiz, then maybe he was on 8th question, and then the 10 minutes has elapsed. In that case, the test should be auto submitted, right? So these three different cases, we need to have that status somewhere, right? The first thing, we'll have this completed on as nullable. This thing first we'll do, and then we should have that status. So what we will do, maybe we can have an enum somewhere. That enum will belong to API only, right? Okay. So we'll create that enum inside API only. In API, we'll say quiz status, or let's say student quiz status, something like this. .cs. This should be an enum, and here we'll say completed. Then we'll say exited, and then third one we'll say auto submitted. Okay, these three things we'll have. Cool. And in this student quiz, or maybe we can have one more, we'll say in progress, or let's say started, the default case. Okay, so the way we'll store these in database, we'll store this as a string only. We have to score. Here we'll say public string, and here we'll say status, and on this the default value should be name of student quiz status dot started. This is going to be the default one, and this string, this should not store anything apart from these four options. So for this, on this status, we are going to use allowed values attribute. In this, we are going to have name of student quiz dot started, then we'll have name of dot completed, then we are going to have name of this student quiz status dot auto submitted, and last one we are going to have name of this dot what is the last one, exited. So we need just these four values to be inserted in inside this column, nothing else. Okay, cool. We have modified these things. We have added a new entity, we have added this new column to this existing entity, and we have changed the data type of this completed on. We made this nullable. So for all these three things, we need to run our migrations. Okay, so we'll run our migration. Let's go to package manager console. Here we'll have default project is Blazing Quiz API only. We'll say add migration student quiz migration. The name is up to you. So there are multiple startup project. It is taking API which we need. If that is not the case, you have two different options. There is one option to add the startup project in this add migration command. And if you don't want to learn that command, remember that command, then what you can do, you can simply go here, right click on the solution, set the API project as startup project, and then you can start to run the migration. It will take some time. Let's wait for it. It generated this for us. Let's see. So we have these migrations. It is altering the column on student quizzes table, completed on, nullable is true. Old was type of date time, old type was this one. Yeah, old, we don't have any problem with the old one, but nullable is true. That is what we need. Then adding a column status with this, then creating this new table. It should have primary key of these two things. So it has this primary key with those two things with two foreign key IDs. Update data has, we are good with this. We don't have any problem. In down, it will do the opposite. So we are good. Now, do we have that running the migration automatic thing? Yes, apply DB migration. It will automatically run these migrations when we start the application next time. So we are good. Our migrations are there. Now we will just check. We'll just start working on the student quiz service again. Here, started on is this. Now let's see, completed on. We don't need to set it because this is not completed yet. Score 0. Status, that is default, but let's have this here. Student quiz status dot started, and I guess we are good with this entity. Now we can just add this entity. So we'll say context dot student quizzes dot add student quiz, and then we can say await context dot save changes async. All right, now this is the initial starting up. Then we'll have the student quiz id here. Now on the basis of this thing, we need to fetch the new question. So now we might have start quiz and serve first question. We can maybe do this, or maybe let's keep it simple only. So we have the start quiz async here. From here we will simply return quiz API response, right? Quiz API response. Can we return some data from this? We have designed it to be each success and error message only. Quiz list TTO. Let's create one more version of this. Quiz API response with T data. So we can provide some data as well. So we'll have this T data. And here also we'll have these same two methods, success and fail. So with success, we need T data. And if it is fail, we don't need T data, because in that case, we'll use the default data, because in that is a failed, so there should not be any data. From here, we'll return data as the first parameter, and true and null. It's success, yes, error is null. In this case, when this is in failed state, we don't know what the data is. So we'll have default for data, and then false for status, and error message this. So using this, we are good. Okay, let's use this type. From here, when we are saying start quiz, from here we'll return integer, which will be the student quiz id, because we will need that to perform other operation, to perform next operations on this thing. Okay, from here, if everything is fine, we'll simply say return this quiz API response of int dot success, and we'll simply return student quiz dot id. Save it. Okay, and we can handle the errors also here. So we can have try catch here. In catch, we'll have our exception, and we'll simply return quiz API response of int dot fail ex dot message. Save it. All right, so now this method is ready, which will start the quiz. After this, we'll have one method which will serve the question. We'll say public async task, and from here we'll say quiz API response of question DTO serve next question, or get next question for quiz async, something like this. Get next question for quiz async, and here we will get the student quiz id as a parameter, because on the basis of that only we'll be able to uh, see what quiz it is, what number of questions it has, and all that stuff. So here it will be int student quiz id. All right. Now here, first thing we will do, we will get the student quiz from the database. So here we'll say var student quiz equals await underscore contact dot student quizzes dot first or default async. We'll say s dot id equals student quiz id. Next thing we'll do, we'll check if the student quiz id is valid. So we'll say if this is null, just return from here with an error. Return this dot fail. We'll say quiz does not exist, something like this. If that's not the case, now from this student quiz, we should have the quiz information as well. When we say quiz information, then quiz details, questions, and all that. So we have two approaches. Either we can eagerly load those here, or we can load those on demand. Here, student quiz, student quiz. From this student quiz, we should be able to get the student quiz questions. This thing. Okay, for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to have multiple database calls, but in real application, you will not do this. I can show you. I can add a command at to do. Try to get the data in less number of database trips. Okay, I'll add this. Now we have student quiz here. It's student quiz and it is valid, we know. After this we'll say what are all questions we have served already. So here we'll say questions served. We'll say await underscore context dot student quiz questions dot where s dot student quiz id equals this student quiz id dot select. We just need question id from here, s dot question id, and on this we can say to array async. Now we are good. Where this, select this, so this thing we can avoid this directly eagerly loading this thing with student quizzes if you want to, or maybe let's do this. Okay, so we'll go to student quiz and here we will have one more navigation property. We'll say I collection of student quiz question. We'll say student quiz questions with virtual. Save it with the default value as an empty array. Save it, and now we should be good. Let's come here, and when we are fetching the student quizzes, at that time only we'll say just include s dot student quiz questions. Include these as well. So here, instead of doing this thing, we can have this student quiz dot select s dot student quiz questions. Oh, sorry, not select. This is not in collection. So from here, from student quiz, we can directly say dot student quiz questions dot select. Here we can say select s dot question id dot to array. So now we have whatever questions we have already served, we have that list in this variable. All right. Now we need to get the next question. Now we need to have grid information as well for this, and that we'll already have from the student quiz. So here what we'll do, we'll say var next question. We just need one question. So here what we'll do, we'll say underscore context dot mm, 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 how we are storing questions, quiz questions. Are we storing quiz questions or not? In quiz, question has quiz ID. Yes. All right. So we'll say context dot questions dot where q dot quiz ID equals student quiz dot quiz ID. Okay, we have filtered out questions for this particular quiz. Now from this we need to randomize this. So here we'll say order by q goes to, here we need random order, so we'll simply say grid dot new grid. So just random order. From there we just need to pick one, so take one dot, here we can say simply first or default sync. Now we have next question, but when we are saying this order by, just randomize this and take one, it can serve us duplicate question from here. So that's why what we will do, we already have this list where we know that all these questions are already served. So we will just skip these IDs from here. So after this where we can add one more where, and here we'll say where this question served dot contains q dot id and not contains. So here I'm saying that give me the questions which belongs to this quiz, which are not served already, randomize it, give me the first one. That's what we are saying. Okay, so we have next question now. We'll return this next question from here. But before that, we need to check if this next question is null. If that's the case, we'll return an error from here and we'll say no more questions for this quiz. Although this should never come because we need to handle it on we will handle it on UI. We'll see whatever number of questions we have, or maybe we should do that thing here only. Should we or should not we? So what I mean is, let's say there were only 5 questions, we were on the fifth one. When we'll come here, it should not fetch the next question because we already served 5 questions. So we should handle that case both of the places. Now we don't need this, we already have these things, and we need this one because we are randomizing it, so we can skip this thing. Let's handle it on UI only, so maybe it can be assignment for you, you can handle that case here. But for now, for this, for the sake of simplicity, we are good with this. From here we will return this next question. So we'll say return quiz API response question DTO dot success and return this next question. What happened? This next question, okay, we need to transform it to this question DTO. So on this next question, after all, we'll say select new question DTO. Here we'll say ID is this, text is this. For options, we'll say q dot options dot select new option DTO. For option DTO, we'll say ID and text, but we will not return correct answer from here. Okay, we will check that thing on API layer only. Dot to list, and now we are good. Our next question is ready to be served. Happened. Select this. Next question is question DTO, and it is saying nullable to non-nullable. Okay, let's make it nullable. Nullable. Save it. Now it should work. Task. Oh, this should be awaited here. Await. All right. So our serving of the next question method. This method is ready. Now we will work on that saving users response. Okay. That means after selecting the option, after choosing the option, when user says next question, then we should come here. We are serving next question from here, but we are not saving the response. So here also we have two approaches. We can have two different methods, or we can have only one method which will do both of these things. Then we can have two different, let's say, API endpoints, or maybe we can have one API endpoint which will work for both. So we have different approaches. For now, maybe let's have two different methods here. Then we'll see how we are approaching to the API side. But right now, let's say get next question for quiz async. Our method is ready. We are okay with this method. The next thing we'll say public async task, and here we'll say save response, or save, what we should call it, save response for the question async, something like this, right? Save question response async. Okay, now here we will have, first we'll have student quiz id. For this student quiz id, then we'll have question id, and then we'll have the option, selected option id. We'll have these three things. Okay, now for these three things we can create a record type as well. So let's copy these three things, go to the shared project. In DTOs, we'll create a new DTO. We'll say quiz question response.cs, or let's say student quiz question response.cs, something like this. Public record, and we'll have those three things here. So student quiz id, then question id, then option id. Save it, and we'll use this as a parameter to this method here. Response, we should follow the convention. We are having response DTO. So we'll say DTO, and here we can say just DTO. Now here also, first we need access to this student quiz. So we'll say student quiz. We'll do the same thing we are doing in the first method. So we'll simply copy this, and then we'll come here. We'll do this student quiz, fetch it, and it should be DTO dot student quiz ID. Right now we'll see what we'll return from here. From here, I think we should return just quiz API response, nothing else. We don't need anything else. So here we'll say return, just remove this generic type, question API response dot fail, this one. And next thing, we need to check if the user's selected option is correct or not. And before that, there is one more thing we are missing in the previous method. get next question for quiz async. After fetching this next question, before returning it to the client, we should save it inside the student quiz async, this student quiz questions table. So here we should do this. We should do uh, hmm, we should say was student quiz question equals new student quiz question and student quiz ID, and then question ID, it should be this next question dot ID, and then we should say context dot student quiz questions dot add this, and await underscore context dot save changes async. All right, and we should handle error here. If it comes to this exception thing, we'll return this success from here, and if it comes to this exception, we'll say this fail, and we'll say ex.message. We should send some user friendly message, but for now we are good with the ex.message. All right, now we are here in save question response async. Save it. We checked if this quiz exists. Yes, then we'll check what is the correct option for this particular question. Okay, so we'll say var uh, var here we'll say correct option ID equals, we'll say await underscore context dot options dot where o dot question id equals dto dot question id and o dot is correct. From this you need to select o dot id and get the first dot default async from where select and this. Okay, or maybe we have one more approach. What we'll do, we'll say question id is this and option id is this, and then we'll simply compare. Yeah, that is also an option. So we can say o dot id equals dto dot option id. We'll not do this select here, or we can, if we want to, we can say dot select. We just need to get the is correct flag. O dot is correct. We'll just do this, and here we'll say first dot default async, and we can simply say is selected option correct, something like this, and then we'll simply check if is selected option correct. We'll increase the score. If not, we will not increase the score on this student quiz. Here we'll say student quiz dot score equals student quiz plus 1 basically, so we can say plus plus. If it is not correct, then we will not increase the score, we'll leave it like this only. The next thing we'll do, we don't need to have this, or we need to have this question in the table. We'll clean that up later. So using this we are good. Now from here we can simply return quiz API response dot success. Before that, after setting this plus plus, increasing the score, we need to update the student quiz back to the database, and here we don't need this include. We can skip this. Then here this is as tracking. We can explicitly tell it that we are tracking it. Here we'll say await underscore context dot save changes async. We can maybe wrap this thing in try catch, and then from here we can return error return quiz API response dot fail ex dot message. If that's not the case, at the very end, we'll be good with this success. So save question response async method is also ready. After this, what we'll do, we'll work on those three things: exiting the quiz, auto submitting, and actual final submit. Those three things. First, we will go with the happy flow. So we'll say public async task. Here we'll say submit quiz async. Int student quiz ID. And first thing again, we need to do the same thing what we are doing here, getting the student quiz. We can move this to a separate private helper method as well if we want to. We have this thing, we'll check the student quiz ID. From here, we'll return quiz API response. At the very end, we'll return quiz API response dot success. Okay, first we checked for this quiz. Okay, then we are submitting it. So we should check if this is not already submitted. So we'll say if student quiz dot uh, completed on dot has value. If it already had some value, that means this quiz is already submitted. So here we'll say quiz already submitted, something like this. Now if that's not the case, we'll come here and then we should, next thing what we should validate for, we should check if completed on has value or completed on will not have any value if user exited it, right? So or the student quiz dot status is equals here we'll say name of student quiz status dot exited. If that's the case, we'll consider that quiz is already submitted. Okay, then if that is also not the case, then what we should do, set the status and completed on flags and then remove question IDs from that student quiz questions table, right? Let's do this. Here we'll say student quiz dot completed on equals datetime dot UTC now. Then we'll say student quiz dot status equals name of completed. After that, we'll say var questions equals await underscore context dot student quiz questions dot where q dot student quiz id equals this student quiz id dot to list async or to array async. Then what we'll do, we'll simply remove all these questions. Let's name it student quiz questions one. Student quiz questions. Here we'll say underscore context dot student quiz questions dot remove range, then move, delete this. So there is also bulk delete option here, but I'm not going to use it because I want all these things to be part of the same transaction. It should work directly in DB context. If I do that thing that we have context dot student quizzes dot whatever we have, for example, let's say this where, after this where we can execute that execute delete and execute delete async. So this is not going to be the good fit for our use case, because how this execute delete and execute delete async method works, these works outside of EF course change tracking mechanism. It will directly go to the database, delete it, and there will be no transaction and no change tracking inside this EF. So maybe if that succeeds and something else breaks, then we'll have our data in inconsistent state. That's why I'm not using that execute delete here. I'm using this approach. Then we'll say context dot save changes async, await, and do this. Now these things, we want these things as part of in try catch block, basically this thing. So I'll say try catch exception, and from here, from outside, we'll directly return this quiz API response dot success, and inside this catch we'll return. Again, for real application, you will not return direct uh, ex.message. Instead, you'll return some user friendly message. You log this exception for your reference, and then you'll fix that error or something like that. Okay. Okay, so this method is also ready, the submit quiz async. Then let's copy this method, paste it. We'll see if we want to merge these methods or not. Right now, whatever is coming to my mind, I'm just writing it. Okay, then we'll see what abstraction we can use, what all methods we can combine, or all those things we'll do later. Next, basically. So this was submit quiz async. Then here we could say exit quiz async. If user clicked on exit quiz, then we'll come here, we'll first check if quiz exists, then we'll check if that quiz is still in correct state, that means it has not completed yet, or not in exit state. So quiz is already completed. Here we can say something, quiz already completed. Okay, so it completed has, either we have the completed value, or it is already exited, or what. No, if it is already exited, then also we will not exit it again. If that's not the case, then we'll come here. So we should we set completed on? No, right? So let it be null. Status should be exited, and we'll remove the questions and all this stuff. We'll do this. Cool. Save it, and then we will have one more method where we'll say auto submit. Auto submit. First we'll check it, then we'll check if this is not exited. Quiz already completed. For submitting the quiz, we are checking if it already has some value. Okay, so this completed on, if this had some value, then we'll consider it as auto submitted or user submitted, right? That's why I'm having this. Okay, all right, we are good with this. We are good with this as well. Now, if we came here, we are auto submitting. So completed on should be current time. So date time dot UTC now. Then this should be auto submitted, and then it should follow the same thing. So we have these three methods for this one. Now if we try to compare these three methods, what we have here, initial check is same. Then we have these two things are different, setting the completed on status, and after this also we have everything same. So for all these three methods, we are going to have three different API endpoints, but this business logic, this logic, we can have this centralized. So let me copy one of these, maybe just copy this first one, copy everything, create a method here. So we'll say private async task quiz API response. Here we'll say save quiz response, something like this, or what we should do? We should say, let's say complete quiz async, something like this. Here we'll have int student quiz id, and then we are going to have, let me first paste whatever I have copied. So here we need to have these two things dynamic. So we have this completed on. Let's get it as a parameter. So nullable date time, we'll say completed on. Then third thing, we need this status, which is in string format. So we'll have string status. These three things we'll need. We'll get this here. Student quiz ID is fine. This completed on, we'll use this completed on. For the status, we'll use direct status. Save it, and now we are good. All right. Now let's go to all these three methods. From the first one, we are setting date time UTC now. Let's have these two lines only. When we are directly entering this, we'll say return uh, await submit or complete quiz async. First thing, we need student quiz ID. Second thing is completed on, which is this datetime.utc now. Then third thing is this status completed. So we'll just cut this, paste it, name of this thing. So this is string. We are good. Now we can remove this everything inside this method. Because this is single line, we can use expression body method. Arrow and then do this and we are good. All right. Now for the second method, here we are setting completed on to null and this exited. So the second one, let's copy the first line, come here, make this, and here this completed on would be null, and this status would be exited. Then just remove everything. Then we have this auto submit method. This also, let's remove whatever we have inside. We will just use UTC now and auto submit it as the status. So we'll delete this, all this stuff. We'll have this thing here, student quiz, and completed on is datetime.utc now, and the status would be auto submit. And now we are good with all these methods. I guess with these things, let's say when user is starting the quiz, it will come here, it will start the quiz. Then they are saving the response, they will use this. Then they are going to the next question, they'll use this. Then if they are within the time range, they will submit it. If they will exit it, this method is going to be called. If the time elapsed in between, this will be auto submitted. So looks like with the service side we are done. Now next thing, we'll create our API endpoints and then we'll go to the UI part. Alright, now let's go to the endpoints and start working on endpoints. So we'll go to endpoints, student quiz endpoints. Here we have available quizzes. And now, let's create one more group. So we'll say quiz group, and this group will create on top of that main group, group.map group. And here we'll say /API/students/quiz. After this, we'll start working, or maybe we can say, yeah, just /quiz only. Now in this quiz group, we will map post. First, we'll start the quiz. So here we'll say /quiz and /quiz ID, which is going to be a grid, and we'll say start. So start this quiz. Okay, we'll have a sync and this quiz ID as a parameter here. Then we'll inject our service, that is student quiz service, student quiz service. And here we'll get the response from our service. So we'll say await service start quiz async. In here we need student ID and quiz ID. So quiz ID we already have, and for student ID we will get the student ID from our claims, from the current identity, because we are logged in, we are checking the role. The same way we will get our user ID from the claims only. So for that, what we need to do, we need to inject claims principal. Here we'll say principal, and from this principal we can get the user ID, which will be student ID in our case, this case. Here we'll say var student ID equals principal dot claims dot find first value. Find first value, there is a method find first value, right? Or this is directly on principal find first value. Inside this we need to provide claim type. So we'll check what claim type we are using to store the user ID. So we'll go to our auth service where we are generating our JWT token. We are using this name identifier for ID. So this is the type. We'll go here, find first value, this one, and this needs to be integer. So we'll parse this. We'll say convert dot to int 32 and just add it here. This is a student ID. So we can pass this here. We'll say student ID comma quiz ID. From here we can simply say return results dot okay response. Now the student ID, we will need this in all the next calls. So instead of adding directly this thing like this, what we can do, we can simply create an extension method on this, so that we can create here only, because this student quiz endpoints is already static class, so we can use this only. So we'll say public static int get student ID. This we'll get from claims principal, and we can have this thing here. This is just a static this extension method on principal. So we'll say student ID equals principal dot get student ID, or we can directly have this thing inside this start quiz async, and we can remove this. And then because this is direct single line, we can directly have this in this results dot okay call. Now we don't need this. And now because this is a single line, we can simply use expression body, just arrow and this thing. We don't need curly braces now. We'll cut this, remove everything from here. From here we'll return this. And now we are good with this thing. Okay, now this was to start. The next thing, we need serving the questions. Okay, so here we'll say now next question. We'll say next question. For first also it will say the next question. Now we don't need quiz ID now, we need student quiz ID. So here we'll change this, we'll say student quiz ID. This is going to be int. Here we'll say int student quiz ID, and then we'll say next question. What was that? Get next question for quiz async, and in this we need to pass student quiz ID as a parameter. We don't need anything else. Student quiz ID. Or we can validate, we can have one extra validation in all those methods, student quiz service methods. We can check if this student quiz ID belongs to this student only. If we want to, that can also be a extra set of security. You can have this instead of after the student quiz ID, you can also have int student ID. Okay, in this student quiz ID here also we can have student ID, int student ID. Let's add this int student ID, and same thing for all these methods. Int student ID, int student ID, int student ID. Same thing we'll do inside the status, int student ID, and we'll validate these. So get active is fine, the first one is fine. Then we have this get next question. Here when we are checking this, after this thing we can have this one more thing, the student quiz dot student ID. If this is not equals to this student ID, then we can say invalid request. Let's copy this if condition, go to the next method, add this thing. Here this is just quiz API response. Go to the next one. From here we just need to provide student ID as a parameter. So we'll say student ID, and student ID. And in this last method, here when we are checking it, we'll have this condition as well here. So we'll say invalid request. Save it and we should be good. Now from here, we need to provide get next question async student quiz ID, comma student ID. And now we are good. Student ID, principal dot get student ID. We know this will never be null because we are using it after this require authorization. It is never going to be null. If you are not sure that you are using it, so you should handle the case where this name identifier does not exist, principal is not, identity is not authenticated, all that things you need to test. But in the context where I'm using it, it is certain that it will be there, claims principal will be there, it will be authenticated, identity will be authorized, it will have name identifier, and it will have the correct student ID because the role is student. Alright, this is next question. After serving the next question for the first time, we'll have saving the response for this. So student quiz ID, then we'll say save response. So for saving the response, if we say save question response async, it needs the, what is this? Student quiz question response DTO. This is going to be the type which we need to have from the body. And before that, this second thing, next question, this should not be map post, this should be just map get. Start should be post, next question should be get, and this one should be post. So map post, and here we need student quiz ID. We don't need explicit student quiz ID, we can have this for extra validation. Then here we will say student quiz question response DTO, we'll say DTO, comma this, and then here in this we'll just provide DTO and nothing else. What is the problem? Why it is complaining? Oh, we need one more. Okay, now we can have one more validation here, the student quiz ID from the URL and this student quiz ID from this DTO. This should be same. We should have this thing. So let's quickly do that. Here we'll say this is fine, this is just for returning. Before that we'll say if student quiz ID is not equals to DTO.student quiz ID. From here will return results dot bad request return, or maybe this is not a bad request, this is unauthorized or forbidden, right? Let's return unauthorized. All right, saving the response. After that, we'll again fetch the next question from here. After this, we are going to have three endpoints. Those are going to be map post only, and those will be first one on this one. First, we'll have student quiz ID and we'll say submit the quiz. So we'll say submit quiz async, and this should be map post. Then we'll have one more with auto submit. Then we are going to have one more that will be exit. Not this, what was that? Exit quiz async, right? Yes. So using all these, our API endpoints are also ready. Now we can go ahead and start working on the UI part. First thing, we'll add these API endpoints in Refit client and then we'll work on that page. There is some error here. So with this, we are good. Let's build this application so that we'll mostly API. So we'll know that there is no build error. And rebuild all succeed. All right. So we are good with this now. Let's pin this and pin the student quiz service. Then close all others. Oh, this one student quiz endpoint, and we need student quiz service, and yeah, these two only. All right,